right? They're totally different things, and people get that confused all the time.
That's right.
And not all managers are leaders, and not all leaders are managers.
And this goes not just in organizations, in your personal life, your friends, your partner, whoever it is, they just want to be heard, at times, and you don't need to say anything.
All people, whether you're a leader or a manager, you have to know how to foster a psychologically safe or safe environment.
What is the most difficult emotion to control as a leader? The RK Leadership Podcast, where we help empower tomorrow's leaders through sharing of knowledge, experience, and inspiring stories. I'm your host, Rob Cameronpour, and my special guest today is Sejal Thakkar, who is the Chief Civility Officer, Chief Culture Officer, employment law expert, and 2 times TEDx speaker, and the list goes on and on, but I'll let her kind of do a little bit of an introduction. Before that, I'd like to say thank you very much for taking your time to be here with me today. I greatly appreciate you being on my podcast. And without further ado, take it away.
Thanks. No, I appreciate you inviting me, Rob, to share a little bit about my story and what I'm doing these days. So I, as I was kind of getting ready for this, you had said, what is my story? And you wanted me to kind of start with that. And I don't know, that's a tough one because there's so many different parts of my story that really, have cultivated sort of what I'm doing now and the work that I do. But I'll go back to the beginning just to set a little bit of background. I was born in Chicago. My parents are Indian immigrants, and they came to the United States in '74. And so part of my story is about, just being here while my parents were from there and having to deal with that duality growing up. It was like being back in India at home. And then here I am outside the house, in the American culture, which I love as well. So that's one aspect of my story, and we can talk about that if you want. And then the other piece of it was that we grew up in a predominantly Italian neighborhood, and we were the only Indian family. And so I talk about this aspect of my story in my first TEDx talk and my second one, a little bit more, just, experiencing bullying and harassment, discrimination, beyond elementary and high school years. And all of these sort of encounters and experiences that, really impacted sort of my career trajectory and where I'm at.
Yeah, I was actually going to ask you that question too. And, we all deal with, especially the immigrants that have, as, myself coming here as an immigrant, we've all gone through that kind of stage. And, I like the fact that you talk about certain aspects of this still in what you're doing today. Now, with respect to the, what you experienced, and I know that you were also, you did some employment law back in the day. What parts of that did you see, in your career in that stint? And how are organizations dealing with these kind of issues?
Yeah, thank you. And so I'll set a little bit of context there. I'm still a licensed attorney in California. I just sort of shifted what I was doing. For the first about 10 to 12 years of my career, I was a defense attorney. So I was actually practicing, I was in court, I was representing leaders and supervisors. And a lot of the cases I worked on dealt with sexual harassment or any kind of harassment, discrimination, wrongful termination, those types of cases. And so I did as a litigator, I saw a lot of things. But then a part of my, work was also doing a lot of workplace investigations. So I would go in and investigate complaints. So when an employee made a complaint, I would do that investigation. And so I got to see organizations from that like nuts and bolts perspective as well. aside from the legal lens. And then, and after I made my pivot to sort of, when my son was born 12 years ago, I decided I didn't want to do litigation anymore. I was more focused in on training at this point. It was a passion area for mine. And so I started my own company, TrainXtra, where I work with organizations, where I was counseling them and guiding them. And I say all of that just because I want to set the kind of the background for where my perspectives that I'm going to share with you come from. It's not just from a legal perspective or compliance perspective. I've seen it from all angles, right? And so, yeah, I saw a lot during that time, and some of the things I saw, and that's why I decided to focus in on training, was, a lot of times you had people, especially managers that were good managers, these were the people I was defending in court. And a lot of times I was sitting there saying, wow, if this person would have had the proper training or the proper coaching, then maybe we wouldn't have ended up there, and then the other side of that was I was seeing companies, they were basically focusing, they were spending money on training. They were spending money on trying to make it more of a respectful environment. But I felt like they were misguided. They were spending it either on the wrong things, or they were not really focusing in on areas that I thought they should have been, where it was more of a kind of a, let's set ourselves up for defense. If something happens, right, let's prevent those claims from happening, or what are we going to do to protect ourselves, versus let's just create a culture that's respectful, that's a high performing culture, et cetera, psychologically safe culture. Some of these things where I was like, you're not doing anything to foster that, right? And so training really became an area where I always say this, I replaced the courtroom with the training room, because I wanted to get in before the lawsuit. So my tagline at the beginning when I started my company was, let's do this right so we could keep those darn employment lawyers away, right? And so that kind of became my thing. I did a complete shift. I was like, I'm that person. I'm going to take everything I've learned and help you do it right from the beginning.
So do you think organizations are really, listening to that and actually providing proper training to their managers?
I would say we have a lot of work to do. We definitely have a lot more work to do. And, yes, am I seeing a change? Am I seeing more employers open to really working at culture and putting in the proper support and resources? Because a lot of people say things, right? But are they actually doing anything about it? And that's where I think, we're at kind of like a really important point right now, because we have so many things going on in the world where if you don't support your leaders properly right now, there's no way you can succeed, right? Like technology. If you don't train your leaders on how to be technology savvy, you're done. You're toast, right? Like you have to know that. But also there's a lot of gaps too, right? That I think are here because of the current world situation. So even if you've had a ton of training in the past, that's not really what the kind of training you need right now, right? The kind of training you need right now is different. It can't just be those sort of trainings where you go in, you listen for a couple hours once a year. That's not going to work. You have to look at it more of how do we create sort of experiences for leaders so they have the practical skills, the tools, so that they can start practicing those right away and continue to improve their leadership abilities.
Awesome. So now going back to what you've experienced, before to now, what are some of the leadership gaps that existed in the past versus what exists now?
Yeah, it's totally like, one of the biggest things I would say is when I felt this when I first started my training, the gap is really on, I think, leaders getting moved up the ranks. And Rob, you and I talked about this during our first conversation, right? And I feel like I keep saying the same thing over and over again, but I do. But we keep promoting leaders up because they meet their numbers, they do a good job, but not everybody is meant to be a leader, right? And so I think organizations really need to look at how are you preparing your leaders for the challenges that we're dealing with today. We talk about cultural shifts that are going on. We talk about how we're all dealing with clients all over the world. So you've got global market dynamics that are going on. We've got technology that's changing, by the day, and we have to keep up with it. And so for everybody that's listening right now, I mean, for all organizations, right? The question you need to be asking yourself is, are we doing enough to prepare this next generation of leaders, right? And then I'll add something too. I don't think it's a matter of, it's not a matter of skill deficiency, because I do see a lot of leaders that are out there that have the skills to be good leaders, right? It's a matter of developing them, but also realizing that the traditional sort of leadership type of development programs versus the realities of the world that we're living in now, they're often disconnected, right? So as we want to think about it from a perspective of an ongoing development, incorporating all different methods, all different modes of communication, because we don't all learn the same way. We learn differently. And so, here's an example. I did a training for a client last week, and they asked me to do it in person. And I would say 95% of the trainings that I do right now is online. I do it all on Zoom for the most part. But this one client asked me to do it in person, and I went there, and I haven't done an in-person training in a couple of months. And I quickly realized that there is a huge difference in doing it online, where you can incorporate all these different interactive activities. People can have a camera on, they can have it off. We have the chat, we use the breakout rooms. I find that it was way more effective in getting the results that I want when I do it online. When I did it in person, the other thing I noticed too is, people's energy levels are different during the days, right? And so I think we need to be a little more flexible in letting people sort of know, like, what are the best times? Are you a morning person? Are you an afternoon person? These are all things we have to think about. And the companies that were all just like, we're going to do this once a year, or we're going to just, I'm like, you're wasting your money. You're literally throwing your money out the door, because everybody learns differently. So you have to figure out how to include everybody in their leadership development.
Yes, no, that's a great point, Sejal. And one of the things I find that going through training myself back in the days, you come in for, an 8-hour session for 3 days. First of all, people's attention spans have gone down like quite a bit since then. So you're not even going to have people pay attention after 2 hours. And, you provide this training to them. And how do you make sure that it sustains and stays with them when you're not really mentoring or coaching them throughout the year? So, they get this 3 days and then it's washed up and thrown out. Like you said, it's a huge waste of money.
It's a huge waste of money. And then you also reminded me of the fact that we talked about making sure leaders are tech savvy, but I want to make the point that, technology is taking over a lot of some of the stuff that we do. I mean, and so we have to face that, right? And not run away from it, to say, okay, how can we use technology to help you do your job better, or to free up the time that you're doing on things that technology can do, so that you can use your brain and do the things that are going to make you different, right? They're going to help us in a different way. But I think the point that I want to make on that is, this shouldn't just be just for the top leaders. This needs to be across all levels of leadership, right? So it can't be an option thing. It's a necessity, right? And it's all layers of the leadership. I mean, I personally feel like the frontline managers, the middle line managers need the most development, right? Leadership development. And so, like, when I first started my company, TrainXtra, in 2017, I was doing, so in California, there's a law that says that anytime you work as a state supervisor, so for like DMV, any of these state agencies, you have to go through a mandatory 80 hours of training within the first 6 months. And when I first started, and I facilitate all 80 hours of that training. And so when I was doing this, I was like, every single manager on the planet needs at least this 80 hours of training to start with, and then go more, because there were so many topics in there that I, as an attorney, never got training on, right? And so you're asking people that are leaders, they need to know this stuff. There are certain stuff that they just have to know. And so you have to invest in them. If you're in the private, sector where you're not subject to that rule, you're going to have to put the resources behind it, and I can tell right away when a company comes to me, and then they're like nickel and diming me for my fees. I'm just like, go, I might not be the right person for you, because you're looking at this as a transactional thing. I'm not a transactional person. I want to be a part of your culture. I want to help your culture evolve. I don't want to just be like, come in and just do your thing and disappear. A lot of my clients, I go in year after year and I continue to work with them. Right. And that's the key. And so, so I just wanted to throw that one out there.
Yeah. And you said something that was interesting. You said, there's a mandate for them to get 60, 80 hours of this training when they start the role. So that's something I've struggled with, and I hear this from a lot of young leaders. Why are we training people after they get the job? Why aren't we doing that pre-training so they're ready, so they can hit the ground running? At least have a foundation before they start, because leadership is very, very challenging. If management might be easy, but leadership is very challenging.
Totally different things too, right? They're totally different things, and people get that confused all the time.
That's right.
And not all managers are leaders, and not all leaders are managers. Like, I'm dealing with some right now that are great leaders, but they're not great managers. And somebody's got to tell them that, because there's a difference. And a lot of times they don't understand that difference. You can tell right away when you ask a leader, like, what is your vision on something? And they spit out this beautiful vision, and they can see it, and they can inspire people. They can influence that. They're good at that. But then you tell them, give me the strategies, and then you get this like aloof answer, and you're like, okay, so I get it. You've got that piece down, but now we need someone to manage the people with the strategies to help us get to that vision, right? And there's a distinct way of developing both too, because in both situations, you still have to be a people leader. So in both, there are certain things that you need to know regardless, right? Like, how to foster a safe environment. There are certain critical skills you need to have, or you need to learn, which can all be developed, right? But that all people, whether you're a leader or a manager, you have to know how to foster a psychologically safe or safe environment. You also need to know how to foster a positive environment, because nobody wants to work in a negative environment, right? Like, we want to run away from that. I mean, our tolerance levels for negative environments is like getting smaller and smaller. Most people are like, at the first sign of any sight of negativity or toxicity, they're out the door looking for something else, because we know lives are short and we don't want to waste our time working for those kind of companies, right? Or at least not anymore. A lot of people, have put up with it for a long time, but like, how to be positive. Right. And that means knowing how to control your own emotions and being a role model. So there's certain skills. And then also on the other side, there's inclusion, how to be an inclusive leader. Not everybody can be an inclusive leader. You can try to teach people if they're open and they're curious, of course, but we can't assume that every single person you put in a leadership position knows how to do those three things. Right. And those are the three areas that I really focus in on all of my workshops with.
So excellent. Thank you for bringing those points up, and it's a good segue to my, next question, where as a leader, like you said, you've got to develop and create those environments where people feel safe, physically, emotionally, mentally. And we've seen a lot of mental health issues that are popping up left, right, and center. And like you said, the new generation, Gen Z, they will not tolerate that, and we see them, skipping and jumping companies left, right, and center. So, what is your advice for leaders in terms of creating that safe environment, and how important is it, and what impact does it have if you don't have it?
Yeah. How much time do we have?
We got some time, Sejal.
Oh my God, that's a big question. I'll put it this way, right? Contact me if you want all the details, and that's what I do for a living, right? So, but I'll tell you some of the strategies that we're using at Nobody Studios, right? So I've been working. I'll say this. I've been working with leaders my whole career. That's what I've been working with, right? I've worked with companies of all sizes, all diversities and all over the globe. The strategies that we're using at Nobody Studios really are a culmination of everything that I've learned, that I'm bringing as a chief culture officer, right? This is like one of those positions, Rob, where it's like everything you've learned up until this point or not learned, you're going to use right now, right? You're going to learn it and you're going to figure it out. And so, I'm constantly encouraging our leaders. The number one, thing that you have to do to foster psychological safety on your teams is that you have to make time for your team. You have to be present.
Mhm.
This becomes so important at Nobody Studios because we want to build 100 companies in 5 years. And so we want to figure out the secret sauce that's going to help us go at the speed of light so we can just trust each other and go, and so like, I'm the kind of person, and Mark and I just had this. Our Mark McNally's our chief nobody. We just talked about this, and I was like, I'm so glad we had this conversation line now because not everybody can do this, right? I'm the kind of person that I can trust someone right away. I'm going to give you my 100% trust, and then you prove that you can keep it there, that you earn that trust, right? If you break my trust, if you're not present with me, if you don't make time with me, if I don't get to connect with you, I watch your actions. Do your words line up with your actions? And that's pretty how it is, right? I do that very quickly. He's the same way, but not everybody is that way, right? And so in order to overcome that, right? Because we need to trust our teams. The only way you can build trust with your teams then to foster psychological safety is you have to be present.
Yes.
You have to make that time. This becomes very important, especially when you're like a company like Nobody Studios like us, because we're virtual. Everybody's remote. Most of us haven't even met before. So you don't have the luxury of that physical connection that you build that trust when you spend time with somebody. When you don't have that, you have to be really intentional about creating that. And so how do you be present? So some of the things we do, we have a really robust onboarding program where we basically tell people we're going to assign you this team lead. Here's your nobody. Here's this person. If you need this person, Sejal, and then we ask everybody to do one-on-ones with them, not just within the first week. We recommend it during the first week and the second week, but then we continue to encourage that they do it over and over again. We create like virtual team building events where it can be rough because we have a lot of consultants. We don't have a lot of employees, and so you can't really mandate it, but you can strongly encourage that and show the reasoning behind why. Oh, this is going to help us create bonds with each other, right? The other thing of psychological safety that I wanted to share with everybody here. So make time to be present is number one. And then number two, feedback. Feedback, right? Be open to feedback. Everybody is saying the same thing. You want to build in feedback into everything you do. I just did a virtual team building event. I send a feedback form right afterwards. What did you like? What did you not like? How could I do better? Like this, this isn't about our ego. It's really about making sure we continue to evolve, right? So, and then the last thing, that another strategy that I think is super important is to lead with empathy, and not your ego. I think this skill needs, I strongly believe this. I strongly believe this, that empathy is lacking in this world, and leaders are the role models. It all starts and ends with leadership. And if they don't show empathy, right, they don't lead with empathy, and they don't have the self-awareness of how to be empathetic. I mean, again, these are skills that can be taught. So if you're listening and you're like, don't worry about it, you can learn these skills. And so I wanted to share this because I have my own company, and I have some workshops where we teach leaders empathy, but I've also partnered with another organization called Empathify You. So I want to give a shout out to my friend, the CEO of that company, Ajit Dodani. We're partners. And so we've created sort of joint empathy skill building programs, because you can't have civility without empathy, and we can't have psychological safety without empathy. You can't have inclusion without empathy. So it made sense that everything I'm doing, he's doing, but he brings a unique lens to the conversation. He's a former chief financial officer. So for
Yes.
the leaders that all they care about is the bottom line, you're going to understand that this man is putting everything he has into a company, teaching people how to be more empathetic, because that's what impacts your bottom line, right? So
That's right.
contact us. Yeah.
That's right. And yeah, I've actually, we set up a podcast with them, and
Oh,
we're,
you did? Okay,
yeah,
good.
we're
Yeah,
scheduling
awesome.
it. We will be
Yay.
talking about that. So one of the questions I actually posed online, and I want to get your take on it because you brought it up. I asked, how do you train, or how do you teach young leaders empathy? And
Mm,
it was very difficult for people to answer this question.
hmm
So I want to ask you this question and get your thoughts on it.
Yeah. So there's a lot of different skills that go into empathy, right? So some
Mhm.
of the skills we focus in on in our workshops that we do, right, is this concept of how do we understand each other's perspectives,
Yes.
right? So, because here's the deal. We all know we need to have diversity of thought to innovate. I mean, there's no other way to do it, right? If you surround yourself with everyone that looks like you and thinks like you, you're not going anywhere. So the smart companies know, let's fill our thing up with as many different diversity of thought and everything, right? People who think differently, act differently, look differently, just fill it up. And so, but just because you do that doesn't necessarily equate to people knowing how to understand each other's perspectives. And so how can we go through some exercises where teaches people how to see situations from other people's point of view.
Mhm.
Not only does that build empathy, but that also teaches you in how to resolve conflicts. It
Yeah.
also teaches you how to make better decisions, because now you can see everybody's perspective and make a better decision, right? So that's one skill that you have to teach people. Another one is simple, active listening.
Yes.
People don't know how to listen
Yes.
because naturally, by default, our brain is wired to when somebody is saying something that might seem like a criticism or feedback, or our brain is automatically goes into the fight or flight mode, right? And so we have to go against the default
Yes.
and still stay present and still listen to what the other person is saying. And so I'm going to share a trick. This is what I share in my workshops, is that we have to make a conscious effort to listen without interrupting, right? Without interrupting. That's key. You could read any book on the planet on leadership. And I'll be honest, I haven't read that many. I probably couldn't tell 5 leadership authors right now. I haven't had the time to read, which, whatever. But I learned through living my life and taking those lessons. And that's what I talk about. Right. But how do you teach? How do you show someone that you value them and that you value their input if you can't give them your full attention? I'll tell you what, if you give somebody your full attention and you actually listen to them, they will have your back.
Yeah.
Whether or not they agree with you, right? They'll say, all right, we don't agree on this thing, but whatever. I believe in Rob and I'm going to have his back on this. But the only way you get there is if that person makes you feel like you value them. So here's a little trick. Your brain can only do one thing at a time, right? It can either listen or it can think. So if I'm talking and all of a sudden you're thinking about happy hour later or what you're going to do for Easter, whatever's on your mind, guess what? You're not listening anymore. Okay. So the trick is you remind yourself just gently. My son thinks I talk to myself because I do this all the time. Like when I'm going to get on a phone call, I'm like, okay, paraphrase. Just say paraphrase to yourself. I have to paraphrase this back to this person. What that means, you're going to have to summarize back what they just told you. And there's no way you can summarize something back to somebody. There's no way you can paraphrase back to somebody unless you've actually listened to them. So you remind your brain to click into that listening mode because you're like, oh yeah, I have to paraphrase this back. And it just automatically puts you back there. I mean, people have asked me that question about like, how is it so easy for you to connect with other people? Like they're like, you connect with all kinds of people, they see all my pictures and things like that. And I'm like, it's pretty simple. I just actually listened to what they have to say, and I show them that I value them, right?
Yeah.
And so active listening is the other one, and I'll add one more, right? One more. Empathy is more than just listening, right?
Right.
Empathy is doing things to support that person in that moment. So it's not compassion where you're like, okay, I could feel what you're feeling. It's about how can I help you? Like what do you need right now? It's supportive. So it's not what I think you need, because what I think you need may mean nothing to you, right? In your situation. So it's not what I think you need. It's how can I support you with what you need? Right. And so the only way that you can support somebody and take those supportive actions is to get to know them, right? To ask them what they need so that
Yep.
you can provide support. And support could be anything. It could be providing resources. It could be making an introduction, right? It could be offering a helping hand. It could be anything, but your actions speak louder than words, right? So I think that's super important to point out, because a lot of people don't understand the definition of empathy, or they think it's just like, oh, I could feel everybody's pain. Yeah, that's great. But what are you doing about it to
That's
help
right.
them, to support them, right? Yeah.
That's right. No, those are fantastic points. You said, people want to be heard. And this goes not just in organizations, in your personal life, your friends, your partner, whoever it is, they just want to be heard, at times, and you don't need to say anything. And
Mhm.
I always say what you said is one of the most powerful questions as a leader is, how can I help you? It's very
Mhm.
simple, but it does wonders for you.
That's right.
So those are
That's right.
fantastic points. And
Can I just share this with you on this note, just for anybody that's listening and they're like, well, what can we do? So I saw this Instagram reel by Simon Sinek, like an IG reel, and it's about his thing called the 8-minute code,
mm,
where it's like and this is all backed up by science and research, and I don't have it all memorized, but you can look it up online, ask ChatGPT. I'm sure it'll tell you all this stuff. But um, the 8-minute code, where it's like, all somebody needs when they're in a situation where they need help, or they're feeling like it's overwhelming, they're frustrated, they're angry, their emotions are taking over. There is science to back up the fact that all that person needs in that moment is for one person to just listen to them, be there for them for 8 minutes, and then they can get past that. Think about that. So I heard that, of course, and I was like, I love it. So I turned around, went straight to our CEO of Nobody Studios and put it out in our Nobody Studios Slack channel saying, hey, I'm thinking of building this 8-minute code into our Nobody Studios culture strategies. So whenever you get a message from somebody that says, hey, do you have 8 minutes? You know to drop everything and be there for that person, because this is what we wanted. This is how we want to do things around here. Right. And so I haven't gotten the green light on it yet, but yes, I'm rooting and advocating for that rule at Nobody Studios.
That's amazing. It's like a secret code word, when
Yeah.
somebody's in trouble or needs
Do
help.
you have 8 minutes? Do you have 8 minutes? And that's when the person should know right away, this person needs my support.
Yes. I love
Right.
that. That's
Yeah.
fantastic. So I want to ask you, Sejal, with all the information out there in the world today, and these large organizations know exactly, what they need to do in terms of, from a leadership perspective, developing, creating leaders. Why is this still not happening?
This is a great question to really debate on with a glass of wine, right? Like, why? I've probably done that 1,000 times. But I would say the number one reason, in my opinion, is simple: lack of awareness.
Hmm.
Because there is so much information out there, right? But I don't think they see or they recognize the significance of that what effective leadership can do to your bottom line. Like, I just don't think that they understand, because think about it. Things like empathy. Did you hear about that in the leadership before? I don't know. It's a new thing. It's not something we ever heard about, active, these are what they call soft skills, right? Because, guess what? You have to actually put money and resources into teaching your leaders these soft skills. So it requires time, it requires resources. But I know as a lawyer that when you don't do these things, what happens from a legal perspective, and I can share, I've got all the data right here. I'm not gonna, and it's all on my website too, right? But it's because they don't see an immediate return. That's the thing, is there's so much lack of awareness out there on the fact that what you're quantifying as the bottom line,
Yeah.
that's the problem. Let's redefine what that bottom line is, because I just did a poll on LinkedIn a few weeks ago where I asked the question. It was something about like, what do you value more, culture or money? 83% of them said culture. So nobody cares about helping you get to your self-defined bottom line if you're not making sure I'm taken care of, right? But you're not going to see results right away. It's a work in progress. It's like going to the gym.
Yeah.
I've been working out for 3 years trying to work on my arms, and I'm not even seeing any difference yet. It's pretty frustrating, seriously. And I'm like, how much longer do I have to keep doing this, right? I may never see the results that I want in my head, right? But I got to keep doing it. And that's the thing. You got to keep doing it. But so lack of awareness, that I think is the number one reason. And the number two reason is because I don't think organizations have put a value on their people first in the ways they should have. Because if you don't put your people first, right, all the money you're spending on recruiting, on onboarding, on training, none of that matters.
Absolutely.
And so there's things that we are expecting as employees, as workers now, that was never even talked about before, right? Work-life balance? What? I'm working from my home right now. Like, this is my home. I remember when I was working at my last job, I was like advocating for a work at home policy, because I'm like, why do I need to be at the office? I have to drive an hour there and I could do this from my computer at home. And they're like, no way. And now what? Right? Everybody's at home. Things have changed. So if you don't put your people first, how long they're not going to stay for long. Right.
No.
And so you have to be intentional about crafting those strategies, and the bottom line's going to follow.
Yep.
When you look at, it's this simple. You look at diversity statistics, like this has been out for decades about how just having a female leader on your executive team is going to increase your profits by 3 times as much. Like, there's all this research about having diversity in your organizations and how innovative you are and how all these things. And yet, why are companies not doing it?
Yeah, that's a great question. And
I know.
We'll definitely have to chat about that one, because, I have a different perspective on that altogether.
Yeah, what is it? I want to hear it.
Yeah. So, I hear this all the time, and I get questioned about it. And I just recently had a question, with female leaders in a male dominating industry. I always say a leader is a leader.
Mm-hmm.
Stop segregating male and female. If you're a leader, you're a leader. You're a strong leader, doesn't matter. It's like us saying a female accountant versus a male accountant, a female lawyer versus a male lawyer. It's
Right.
all, if you've got that talent, you've got that title.
It's your brain. I mean,
it.
it's your brain. It doesn't matter what the exterior looks like. It's your brain that makes it. And that's the thing, though. And the reality is that most people don't see it that way, right? And I do want to say something to you, because you asked me in our prep about leadership, like what got you. That's what you said. What got you into leadership?
Yeah.
And I want to just throw that out there. It's like, look, for me, leadership. We're all leaders. We're all leaders. Leadership manifests itself in many forms. I say this at every single team meeting that we have at Nobody Studios, and remind everybody there, I see us all as leaders here. I say that over and over again. People are probably like, why do you keep saying that? Because most people don't think of themselves as a leader.
Yes.
But we're all leaders. Anybody that's watching you, whether it's your kids, your spouse, your partner, whoever, they're looking at you, and you're setting an example. Right. In that way. And so it doesn't come with just title or position. I just made some notes here, and I wrote down, it's about actions.
Yes.
It's about influence, and it's about knowing that we all have an ability to either inspire someone or to guide them, right? And so I workshops is one way that I do that, right? I post on LinkedIn, and everything is aimed at that, right? So I want everybody to broaden their definition of what leadership is, and embrace that mindset that we're all leaders, and we can all, we can all do something to make a positive impact too.
That's
You
right.
know, if you want to, and surround yourself with people that are doing that. Like I talked to somebody yesterday, they were like, oh, all the stuff with DEI that's going on. And I go, I know, I'm not even getting involved in any of that. I'm staying away from those conversations, because I don't care what you call it. You can call it diversity, you can call it inclusion, you can call it belonging, you can call it whatever the heck you want. We're still going in that direction, whatever the label is that you put on it. So however you want to describe it, right? But I think that we just need more people to take accountability and say, if you don't like the way things are, then, step up, do something about it.
Take action.
You're passionate about that, Rob?
What's that? Yes. So we need to do a part 2, Sejal, about this, but I know we've got
When I saw the list of questions you sent me, and I'm like, are we doing 20 series or
something like that? We can do that. But I know you've got to head out. So I'm gonna get in before we wrap it up. I got some rapid fire questions for you that I'll ask. So the first thing that comes to your mind, just say it. So what is your key advice for people who want to get into public speaking?
Yes. So I think the best thing is to manage your nervousness, right? I've been posting about this lately a lot, because you're always going to get nervous when you're going to public speak, right? That's normal. I just posted about this like last week. But then how do you not run away from public speaking? Because like we're seeing this a lot. So one of the companies that we're building at Nobody Studios is called Ovations, which is a virtual online talent platform. But it's not just for speakers, right? It's also for subject matter experts. And so if you could be a subject matter expert, but if you've never given a talk at a meeting, that's public speaking, right? And so if you just start doing it initially, of course you're going to be nervous about it, right? I remember like the first time I walked into a courtroom. Are you kidding me? My clothes were drenched. I was sweating when I took my suit jacket off. But you couldn't tell, right? Because I just went in there and I did it. But as you keep doing it, just knowing that anxiety is normal. I, to this day, still get nervous every single time I'm going to do a workshop or any time I'm going to do any kind of public speaking. But I've learned how to channel that into positive energy, right? So I use humor or self-deprecating humor. I'll crack a joke or I'll make fun of myself or something to just kind of get that tension out of me and out, so I can just get back into my game, right? So you got to figure out the right strategies.
Excellent. Yeah. So you didn't get nervous about this podcast, did you?
I wasn't nervous about this podcast because you gave me a list of 50 questions.
Awesome. Yeah, I set you up for success there.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
No worries. What is the best word to describe Sejal?
Oh my God, this was a hard one. I really messaged my son because like that's what matters to me about what he, but he was in school, so he didn't get back to me on it.
I want to hear
you know what? I don't, this is so hard, right? To what word? I would say empathetic. I would just say empathetic. Like I've always been able to just empathize with other people. And that's just because I grew up on the fence, right? Like between different cultures and different intersectionalities. So I can see it from all the perspectives. So I would say empathetic. Yeah.
Okay. What is your unconventional definition of leadership?
No, that's what I just told you. That's what I just said. Everybody's a leader. Okay. We're all leaders. This is like, no, there's no one certain kind of leader. Some leaders do have a certain level of charisma. That's different, but everybody's a leader, right?
Interesting. Okay. And what is the most difficult emotion to control as a leader?
So I initially was thinking all of the typical answers that came to my mind real quickly, but then I literally sat down and thought about this a little bit more. And then I landed on frustration. Right? Because I've seen so many cases where leaders have gotten frustrated with a team member for whatever reason. The reason really doesn't matter. But then because of that, they're impatient. They say things they don't mean. They make these decisions in a rash manner that they end up regretting later on. And so if leaders can manage their frustration better, so, you know, like an example would be just like where you have an employee that's like, maybe doesn't show up to work 2 days in a row. Okay. If you're still keeping time. Right. And then the third day, the leader's like, jumping down that person's neck or talking about reassigning to another thing because they're frustrated at this employee versus going at it from a different perspective and letting that emotion calm down and exploring other options. Can we coach this person? Are they in the right role? Do they understand the expectations? But if you get frustrated and you just respond to that and you can't control it, then you really are not effective. You're not an effective leader, in my opinion.
And you can't make an emotional decision. So
no.
Awesome. And the last question is, where can people find you?
Yes. So you can find me on LinkedIn. I'm very active on there. I spend way too many hours on LinkedIn, seriously. So that would be a great place to follow me or connect with me. My website, TrainXtra. So it's TrainXtra. There's no E in the extra, is where you can find out all the stuff I'm doing with regards to my workshops and trainings. And then check out nobodystudios.com as well. That's the venture studio we've been talking about, because I do a lot of culture work for them. And so I'm constantly, talking about what we're doing there if you want to sort of follow along and see what we're doing with our culture there as well.
Awesome. I love the title there, by the way. So keep that going. And again, thank you very much for joining me today. I greatly appreciate your insights, your experience, and your fantastic knowledge that you shared with the audience. And for those who have any questions for Sejal, you can drop it in the comments below and I'll make sure she gets it, or you can contact her directly through the channels that she just provided. And for everyone, thank you so much for joining, and we'll see you on the next podcast. And Sejal, thank you so much again for being with me.
Thank you. This was awesome.
Thank you. Have a great one, everyone.
We did it.
Yes.
Awesome.